Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I apologize for you get to see how the sausage is made. Um, Lessons learned. So I am very pleased to welcome Debbie Rosenfeld, who comes to us as an expert who's been studying anti-Semitism, I think uniquely in the United States, maybe, or at
Yeah.
least
I doubt
Linda,
it.
hang on. Maybe we should give people a couple of extra minutes. It's only 7:20. It says it's just turned 7:30. Why don't we give people a minute or
that's
two and then
that's fine.
yeah. And
So
also you can catch your breath too.
right. So in case you didn't know that that's what our webinar is about tonight. So if that's not what you were coming here for, please stay and consider
Oh,
um,
I
listening
think a
to
couple
Deborah.
more people of our bend the arc core leadership that we expect to be here. I mean, not that they necessarily can make it, but they
It's
expressed a
fine.
desire.
So everybody here except Debbie is a member of OSE. Uh, Hello, Jose. Gerald, hi. Doris, I haven't seen you in 1,000 years.
Well, I've been living in Cincinnati for 3.5 years. I'm a long
That
distance
explains why I
member.
haven't seen you.
wow.
What's in Cincinnati?
My daughter.
Oh, okay.
It
I
ain't
thought
the
maybe
East Coast.
it's a nice town. I like Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Um, Gerald's coming to us from her backyard. Very nice.
Deep Creek Lake.
Oh, you're at Deep
Oh,
Creek. Oh,
Oh,
nice.
are
amazing
you on
that
vacation?
it's amazing you would tune in on vacation to this.
Well, when you're
I'm in.
retired, right? Every day's a vacation. So,
Not well. I need to get a new retirement plan then. Here comes Helena.
Helena, hi, Helena.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Deborah, I'll
My
leave it up to
husband,
you. You make the call when you want to start.
I
maybe
would say we'd give people another minute or so and
Okay.
then sort of
That sounds
plunge in.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Tom is coming in a minute. He's quickly finishing up his dinner.
Well, okay. I think Paula also said she might come. So,
Yeah, she was talking about coming in person, but apparently it's Zoom
There is
only.
there's no in-person version from what I
Exactly,
understood.
exactly.
yeah,
I called to make sure.
I assumed that when it added to my calendar, it would give me the Zoom link, and it didn't. So I had to go searching for it on SchulCloud. Maybe other people are doing the same thing.
Oh, I see.
Here comes
Yeah,
Brian
I tried to send everybody in Bend the Arc an email telling
and
them
Paula.
what to do, although it was a little convoluted. Um,
Hi, Brian. Hi,
Hello.
Paula.
Hello.
Hi,
How are
Brian.
you?
Hi.
okay. I think, Linda, I
You
think
ready?
we should, yeah, I think we should
Okay.
Yeah.
maybe go ahead and start.
Oh, okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Bogofsky. I'm a member of the Social Justice Committee at OSE Shalom, along with Emily, who's one of our co-chairs. And I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's discussion offered by Professor Deborah Rosenfeld. She is Professor Emerita in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. She also headed the university's Curriculum Transformation Project, a 20-year-long international project focusing on gender, race, and other issues of identity and inequality. Before her time at Maryland, she chaired 2 women and gender studies departments at universities in California. She has taught and written about American culture and social change and about diversity issues in higher education and consulted on curricular change at more than 50 institutions around the world. She is currently a core leader of Bend the Arc Jewish Action Maryland and an active member of her Indivisible chapter. And Dr. Rosenfeld, if you want, I will load up the slides and let
Great.
you take over.
Thanks. I probably wouldn't be able to do any of that work in the current environment, in the current political climate. So I'm grateful for the timing of my work life, because it was almost all diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, oh, well, that's interesting. On my on my computer, there we go. Terrific. It sort of came in. So I changed the title of this talk, um, because it was called Real and Smokescreen Anti-Semitism in the US Today. And I realized that I was creating a kind of false binary, because smokescreen anti-Semitism, which is kind of what I'm going to focus on, really is it is it is an anti-Semitism. And I made anti-Semitisms plural because I think there are actually multiple kinds of anti-Semitism. And I'm really focusing tonight on trying to clarify and help us understand what smokescreen anti-Semitism is. And let me say also, before I start, that this talk is a little, I realized as I was, running through it the past few days, it's a little wonky. I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of further in the weeds in some ways of legislation and so on than I might otherwise have been. But I started thinking about this in terms of asking people to support or reject certain kinds of legislation. So this is coming out of kind of activist things that I've done. But what I really am hoping for tonight is a talk and at least a little bit of discussion. The talk itself, I think, is about maybe 35 minutes of talk and a little conversation on the way. And then I hope there'll be some time afterwards, really for discussion. But also, please feel free to interrupt at any time with questions or qualifications. So thanks. So next slide, Linda. Thanks. So anti-Semitism today, there's no doubt about it, really is on the rise. It's risen dramatically since October 7th, 2023, for obvious reasons. People have been distressed by the conduct of the war in Gaza, and we'll discuss a little later about the equation of American Jews with Israel, and that's a kind of problematic equation. But the stats are frightening, and I think it's okay to realize that there were almost 2,000 documented incidents in 2024. That's a 73% increase since 2022, and it's the highest number since the FBI started tracking hate crimes back in 1991. And this astonishing statistic: Jews comprise 2% of the total US population, but account for 69, almost 70% of all religion-based hate crimes. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, has documented hate crimes. And they call into question some of these statistics, and think that sometimes people have been made uncomfortable rather than actually made unsafe, in counting anti-Semitic incidents, something we'll come back to. But they have documented an alarming rise in what they call swatting in the past year. That was a new word for me. It means pranks, like calling in a fake bomb threat at synagogues. Next slide. Yeah. So I think we know what anti-Semitism looks like. I am not going to try to define what real anti-Semitism is. And I've listed some potentially triggering moments in our experiences with anti-Semitism. And you can just take a minute to look at those. I'm not going to read them out loud. But I think that probably all of us have had our own experiences with or encounters with anti-Semitism, even if it's just the more subtle kinds of microaggressions. I think probably very few of us have escaped it entirely. Um, And so it's all of these things, including violence against Jews and harassment of Jews. But sometimes, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on, sometimes it's people claiming to protect us as Jews to further their own agenda and enhance their power. And that's what we're calling smokescreen anti-Semitism. Next slide. So this didn't happen by accident. This onset of smokescreen anti-Semitism. It was designed. Can I just ask for a show of hands if you know you don't have to use the little device to show it. If you can just raise your actual hands. How many of you have heard of Project Esther already? Know about Project Esther? Wow. Okay. Only a couple of you. All right. Well, then let me just briefly say, Project Esther was developed by the Heritage Foundation. It's the same right-wing think tank that produced Project 2025, and I think most of you probably know that that was sort of the plank for the Trump administration, and it's what it's doing right now. It was supposed to protect Jews from anti-Semitism, but no Jews helped to author it. None of the groups on the task force that recommended it were Jewish. They were all Christian evangelicals and Christian nationalists. And the designers actually refused to address the rise in right-wing anti-Semitism. So this was drafted after Hamas's attack on Israel. It was designed to launch an anti-Palestinian project that would make Palestinians a vulnerable, they were seen as a vulnerable group. They would be, it would become a weapon against dissent generally. And I think that, Christian evangelicals were so supportive of this plan. They really believe that Jews returning to a greater Israel, an Israel that includes all the areas that are in contention now, will bring about the end times predicted in Revelations. And Christian nationalists, of course, want a Christian state, but Jews need to come on board with that. So maybe if they protect Jews, we'll be more sympathetic to their designs. That's Project Esther. So next slide. So what it does is, and this is sort of a basic strategy of smokescreen anti-Semitism, it uses Jewish trauma and the history of Jewish trauma and Jewish feelings of vulnerability to advance a right-wing agenda under the guise of protecting Jewish safety. It accuses, this is in the report. I mean, some of the language in the platform that they came up with. It accuses Palestinian groups of being anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-American. And it uses this language again and again: terrorism, anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism. It links those terms to justify the bills and the actions that they want to take. It proposes a plan for dismantling any group that supports Palestinian rights and calls those groups the Hamas Support Network, HSN. And this is from their language. They must be made to feel extreme discomfort, and we will generate the discomfort, that discomfort. It's pretty brutal, actually. And I just want to mention that included in this network are groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is, a fairly left-wing Jewish group, Students for Justice in Palestine, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, and George Soros's Open Society. So they're clearly, these are groups that they're clearly trying to tar with this label of Hamas Support Network. The tools that it has called for, prosecuting on the basis of anti-racketing and anti-terrorism, deportations, public firings, removing tax-exempt status from groups that have it, withdrawing and blocking funding, and campaigns to this is important, to sow discord in progressive movements, all of these strategies have been implemented by the Trump administration. They've been pretty effective at what they've done. So next slide. We are in recent months, obviously, paying a lot of attention to the arrests, the deportations of brown and black immigrants in the US by ICE, and also the scapegoating and persecuting of trans individuals. But the persecution of Muslims who've been outspoken for Palestinian rights is still very much ongoing. This is Salah Sassour, who is the president of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, has been outspoken about Palestinian rights, who was grabbed by ICE agents as he left his home this past March and sent to a detention center in Indiana, had been a legal resident of the US for 32 years. So what this is doing is helping to instill fear in people, fear of protesting, fear of speaking out. It's a very deliberate design, and it is a classic example of using smokescreen anti-Semitism. Sarsour is actually being defended by various Jewish groups, and then the ARC has launched a campaign also, a letter writing campaign on his behalf. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about a couple of very specific right-wing strategies, and I am going to begin with targeting the universities. These are strategies that sort of mobilize smokescreen anti-Semitism. And I'm starting with the universities partly because they are close to my heart. I worked there for many, many years. I have been sadly happy that I retired before this onslaught began, because I know from colleagues who are still working that it has made their lives often quite miserable. So the Trump administration has targeted over 70 universities as they attempt to repress free speech and to sort of change the culture. They claim that campuses have not done an adequate job of protecting Jewish students and faculty in a hostile environment, especially during demonstrations. And I want to say that is probably sometimes true. There have been that students have been frightened, and students have been actually locked into buildings and had people hurl insults at them. This is true. It is, by all the accounts that I've read, a lot less widespread than you would think from the publicity that those moments have gotten. One of the things that the administration has done about it is to deny funds to the universities for everything ranging from individual faculty grants and departments to scientific research projects that have absolutely nothing to do with issues of anti-Semitism. A friend of mine lost a grant. She had a Fulbright to go abroad and lecture about a book that she had recently written. In this case, it wasn't specifically about Jews or Muslims or anything like that. It was about slavery in California. But they took her grant away as part of this general onslaught against the universities that had been triggered by their so-called protection of Jewish students. She herself was Jewish, by the way. So real investigations, actual investigations into Jewish safety on campus basically hasn't happened because the Department of Education, which had been doing those investigations, has been pretty much destroyed. And there have been mass firings, especially of Democrats, at the that should be Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, the EEOC, sorry. And of course, restrictions on DEI initiatives like the project I directed. So, and top universities like Harvard and UCLA have paid millions of dollars to the administration to settle. I'd love to know what happened to that money. Someone should follow that money. Often against the will of the faculty, including often Jewish faculty. And a lot of these tactics have been ruled illegal in the courts especially for constitutional reasons, violating guarantees of free speech. just want to mention that at the University of Maryland, there was a wonderful report that I helped to defend in our academic senate. It was created by a committee chaired by the chair of Jewish studies and the head of peace studies, who was a Muslim. And they documented that, yes, there were incidents of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus. But it drew a really crucial distinction between feeling uncomfortable and actually being unsafe. And they recognized that students might be made to feel uncomfortable if they heard things in classes that sort of were different from their from their basic assumptions about how the world worked. And so, how could you teach, for example, was an issue that came up at Maryland, someone who had wanted to teach the early history, the history of Jewish people coming to what was in Palestine, and the expulsion of the people who were living there, which Arabs call the Nakba. Muslims call the Nakba. Palestinians, talk about the Nakba. And there was some question about whether, if this report hadn't come out, there was a discussion about whether they would still be able to use even that language in teaching. Well, these are what they called it. Could you even say that? So, I mean, there were limits on just kind of basic historical discussions that this report addressed. And it created a whole campus approach to curb harassment of both Jews and Muslims, and it added the need to teach about different historical experiences and perspectives in the classroom, and ways to protect free speech, but not hate speech. Next slide. So I want you all to chime in here, if you're willing. Everybody's on mute, but this is where Mahmoud Khalil, I think you may remember his name. He was a graduate student at Columbia and a lead negotiator in the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. He was actually widely respected on campus. I have friends who have taught at Columbia, and people really respected him. But he was one of the first to be arrested and threatened with deportation. And he was picked up by agents who were acting without a warrant. The State Department wanted to revoke his visa. And again, he was a lawful resident. Um, and he has been released on bail, but he's been fighting in the courts to be able to stay in the country. It's unclear what's going to happen to him. So what I want to ask you to think about, and maybe a couple of people could volunteer to chime in, what work does that phrase Shalom Mahmoud do? I mean, why do they incorporate shalom into this image that came out of the White House? What is that? What is that doing? Why is that there? Anybody want to go ahead, Linda?
Well, when I saw that, first off, it taught, if people understand that shalom is a Hebrew word,
Right.
it ties his expulsion to Jews and Israelis.
Yeah.
So it's not really the White House doing it. It was really Jews and Israelis that made this happen, wanted this to happen. And so it's sort of aligning us with his deportation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's like shifting the blame of him being expelled to Jews and
Yeah.
um, distancing themselves from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really shocked when I saw this, because I felt as though they're suggesting that that this was celebrative for Jews.
Yeah.
That that we're celebrating his expulsion, that we're happy about it. What better way to divide us from other communities that might empathize with Palestinians and what they are going through? So, yeah. Well, thanks. Okay, so go
Debbie,
ahead.
may I just add another thing?
Please, please.
So, it there was this thing called the Abraham Accords,
Yeah.
and that made me crazy because, you know, that it was done out of political expedience. There was never any intent to treat the Abrahamic religious traditions as being on equal footing. Um, that and that um, it it really was intended as a money grab. It had nothing to do with lasting peace or the
Mhm.
safety of Israel or safety of Jews. And this was the same kind of thinking that somehow we're going to be able to monetize this
Right.
uh, this disintegration
Yeah.
of human connections. It'll all work out for us in the end. And who cares what the collateral damage is?
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, that's a good addition. And yeah, as far as I know, Mahmoud, and you know, from people who know him and stories that I've read, was not anti-Semitic. He was anti-Israeli policy, and we're going to discuss a little bit later the difficulties of that, you know, the duality of that. I want to assure you that we're going to get to that as an issue. But next slide for the time being. Um, so continuing this discussion of the universities, how many of you, just show of hands here, how many of you recognize the reference in the title here? Do you know where it comes from? Linda does. No one else, really. Um, this is Joseph McCarthy in the Senate. Maybe I should not use that as a as a title for the slide. I thought everybody would recognize it. It was McCarthy with his list of communists in the United States government. I've done a lot of work on cultural resistance during the McCarthy era, so probably it was more in my mind than it is in yours. Um, so at Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania, and several other universities, there's an investigation of anti-Semitism on campus that's been launched, especially among faculty and staff, but students to some extent. It's been launched by MAGA leadership under the EEOC, and they've been demanding that universities produce a list of Jewish faculty, staff, and students, along with their personal identification information. They say they don't know how to get at incidents of harassment without that information. Penn has been opposing the subpoena. They say it raises serious privacy and First Amendment concerns. Um, the Hillel chapter argued that the collection of Jews' private information carries echoes of the very patterns that made Jewish communities vulnerable for centuries. And if you look down into the middle of the quotation below, the AAUP and other groups, including Hillel, um, filed this motion. They called it a profoundly invasive and dangerous demand that intrudes deeply into the freedoms of association, religion, speech, and privacy enshrined in the First Amendment. Um, so this list making is kind of the latest in their strategy. And again, I think it's absolutely designed to instill fear and anxiety, not to protect Jews. Although of course they're saying the opposite, but we kind of need to look at the sources where this is coming from. Um, Linda, you saw posted something in chat, but I didn't have a chance to read it. So do you want to?
Well, when I first heard this, I thought the way that people identify themselves as Jewish or Jewish adjacent based on parentage or they've chosen to be Jewish, it's like, how would you know? Is there a yellow star on uh, their computer file that
No,
identifies them?
exactly. No,
It's like, so it's
yep,
the idea of
yep.
um, you know, if you've how a university is supposed to do that, and actually being able to produce the list is terrifying, is that they would be willing to do this just to
Absolutely.
get the EEOC off their backs, which in fact it won't. It
Yeah.
won't get the EEOC off their backs at all.
Right. Well,
So
it is a major problem, and in exactly that way, Penn says we don't keep records of students' religious affiliations. That was the university's response to them. But of course, they are now being threatened with the same kind of defunding that has occurred at other universities if they don't come up with a list. So, and there has, alas, been a temporary a ruling that the administration could ask for such a list, but not for personal identifying information. It would have to be done by ID number without the person's name. It's not clear to me how they expect that to happen. And Penn is in the process of appealing that ruling. So there are all of these exhausting lawsuits going on as well. Um, so let's move on to the next slide and the next strategy that I wanted to talk about. And here's where it gets a little wonky. So one of the major strategies of the right has been to encode into law the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. And that definition has many parts, some of which are okay. The problem is it includes a statement that any criticism of a Jewish body or collective is inherently anti-Semitic. So what that means is that any criticism of Israel becomes inherently anti-Semitic. I mean, it really forecloses criticism of Israel. Um, Another problem is that anti-Semitism would be the only form of expression of hate that's named or addressed at the federal level, and Jews the only protected group, which of course divides us from potential allies. Emily just posted that Ben the Ark has been hosting phone calls to protest this in various different states. Right, I have been on phone calls to New Jersey, which decided not to encode this into law, into state law. And they've also done phone banks in Ohio and Wisconsin. And even the author of this definition says it was never meant to be codified into law. It was never intended to be a campus hate speech code. So, but it has been widely accepted. There's been a lot of lobbying, not only by Christian organizations, but unfortunately also by rightist Jewish organizations like the ADL and especially AIPAC. It's been accepted in 38 states. And there's ongoing controversy about adopting it in states, universities, and public school systems. And Emily, yeah, you're right in the chat. I don't know about Ohio, but it did pass in Wisconsin. I'm not. I think it's still up. I'm not sure about Ohio. Um, so the problem is with AIPAC's support of this. This is increasingly problematic. AIPAC has been allied with the right wing for a long time. It's smeared a lot of progressive candidates with charges of anti-Semitism if they failed to offer unqualified support for Israel. And in March of 2024, this really did shock me, it endorsed more than 100 Republican congressional candidates who had tried to overturn the 2020 election, which is, really, really disturbing. Next slide. Um, uh, Hang on a second. Yeah. So the act, what this does, there's this act that's been bouncing around Congress for a few years now in various different forms, and it didn't get through in 2024. It came back on the floor in 2025. It is now in committee. at the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. And what the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act does, it's to incorporate the IRA definition of anti-Semitism as federal law when addressing discrimination complaints in education. Um, so the problem is, in the past, this act was sponsored by liberal Democrats as well as conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats because it seemed on the face of it to be protective of Jews. I think it was a con job. I think smokescreen anti-Semitism, the smokescreen was pretty effective in this case. And increasingly, liberal Democrats fell away from supporting the act. Jamie Raskin is someone I think who supported it initially and no longer has supported it. And again, no legal definition of any other comparable form of hatred, which divides us from other groups, no criticism or examples of anti-Semitism on the right. And actually, this facade of fighting anti-Semitism is really dangerous to Jews because it singles us out for, ostensible protection that other groups aren't getting, and then uses our identity to traumatize other groups. So it has not been a very healthy process of trying to get this act passed. But the next slide, we'll talk about it at the local level. I don't think that it's going to come. I don't think that the AAA is going to get out of committee, but there are a lot of ongoing efforts at state and local levels. And there's one example that's unfortunately very close to home. The Baltimore City public school system is under investigation after a complaint of a hostile environment for Jewish students. And the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, demanded in a lawsuit that the school system adopt the IRA definition. But there's been a lot of resistance, including a lot of resistance from Jewish groups and individuals who were concerned about preserving free speech. I think JUFJ has been involved in protests here. Um, and I was involved. Montgomery County and Baltimore County Jewish collectives were busily writing letters and to the school board, hoping that this would not be adopted. And it has not been adopted. The school district came out with a statement resisting all forms of hate and hate speech. And so far, at least, it has not adopted the IRA definition. Next slide. So, so I really struggled with this slide. And this may not be the only time that I give this talk. So I am going to be really interested when we get to a longer discussion moment at the end, which there are only a few more slides after this, how this works for you and how this, because there is this painful conflict in the Jewish community about how and if to protect free speech when it includes trenchant criticism of Israel and of Israeli policy and of the Israeli government. The community obviously is not united around this. And I've talked a little bit about AIPAC and the ADL and how they've helped the right wing fight for this definition. Ben the Ark has actually, my group has taken to actually naming these groups as people who may want as groups that they want to oppose, because they repress free speech and because they have taken the stance that the emphasis on defending Israel is the only thing that matters. And so there's been this kind of exclusion of the whole range of other issues that people like us and our congregations might care about. So I guess one of the big questions I have about doing a presentation like this, forgive me for, using you in a sort of experimental way, but I'd love to hear back from you. If not in discussion, write me an email about, does it feel safe to discuss this issue to you? Does it feel all right? Does it feel offensive in any way. I know I offended a friend of mine, a good friend, by saying that my position on this was very influenced by Peter Beinert's book on, being Jewish after the destruction of Gaza. And she said, "You like Peter Beinart?" And we surprised each other. So and one way, I guess, of approaching this that doesn't personalize it so much is to ask who benefits from equating all criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism? Who benefits from equating Jews in America with the Israeli state, the way Trump did in the talk, in the Hanukkah party talk that I mentioned, where he kept saying Israel, it was our state. And it's a logic that's been very destructive and dangerous, and even when it's whether it's come from the right or from the left. Um, if you can hang on to your thoughts about this, I only have a couple more slides, and I think we'll have time to come back to it. So next slide, because now we're turning to something good after all of this little bit of darkness. There's a new proposed act in Congress, in the House of Representatives, called the Anti-Semitism Response and Prevention Act of 2025. It directs the Attorney General to establish an office of a national coordinator to counter anti-Semitism in the Department of Justice. So it does, in a way, single out Jews for special protection, but there are other offices that have addressed civil rights by looking at particularly disfranchised populations in the Department of Justice. So what this does is to rebuke and replace the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. It calls it out. It calls out the systematic pattern of weaponizing anti-Semitism to pursue ideological and partisan objectives unrelated to protecting Jewish communities. It refers back to this Biden administration policy document, the United States Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism, which was a really, really good document that was, of course, completely scotched by the Trump administration. It did not rely on a single definition of anti-Semitism, but referred to several influential ones, including the IRA definition, but it also mentioned the Jerusalem document, a nexus definition, definitions that were much more progressive than the IRA definition. And it was sort of a whole government process to set up coordination mechanisms across a number of federal agencies. So next slide. For me, reading this act, the key findings were maybe the most important part of the act. I mean, it lists key findings that come right out of activist pressure on Congress, which was kind of interesting to see. The findings were that the Trump administration has applied the IRA definition in punitive ways. And it also found that included screening social media activity and invading individual privacy, which apparently has been rampant in various ways. We can come back to that if you want to hear more. It argues that students and legal residents have been targeted based solely on their activism and their academic inquiry, which usually has been pro-Palestinian, but sometimes has been pretty neutral. And especially relevant to issues of Jewish safety. And I know that's something that OSE has been interested in, sort of ethical approaches to Jewish safety. It turns out that there is now a mandate to cooperate with ICE and a ban on congregations, houses of worship that have programs that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if people do those things, if they don't abide by administration policy, they do not get nonprofit security grants to fund Jewish safety. So, they are, methinks they speak with forked tongue on this issue. Um, so let's turn to the last slide. Well, last couple of slides, actually. Two more slides. We're done. Um, um, go back to that's it. Thanks, Linda. Um, so now one more slide. The next slide. There we go. So these are statements from an April 2025 document that was actually submitted to the Biden administration people who were trying to design that policy. It was signed by Ben the Ark and 9 other Jewish organizations, and they all 3 major denominations, and it was organized by the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, which is a mainstream group. And instead of me talking, I would love to hear your voices. And because it's a bit late, could we have someone just read the second paragraph? Is someone willing to read the second paragraph for us? Anybody willing to unmute?
I can read it.
Who said that?
Helena.
Paul, I
Helena,
didn't hear.
I don't know if you can see me.
Oh, is that you, Helena? Thanks. Go ahead. I couldn't see your name. Go ahead.
We remain committed to working at every level to ensure policies and practices that protect the Jewish community as well as other marginalized communities and uphold for all people the principles of justice, fairness, and equal protection under the law. That is the only path to true safety.
Thanks. So the approach that Ben the Ark and many other groups have taken, the approach to Jewish safety and security is we need to respect our democracy. We need to to ally with other groups. We need to protect free speech and the freedom of the press and peaceful protest. And we have to be able to recognize that our safety lies in the safety not only of ourselves, but of other groups that have been targeted. So one last slide. Thanks. So, I would love to have readers of these paragraphs as well. These are paragraphs from the Anti-Semitism Response and Prevention Act. And one of the things that has really interested me in following the course of these debates and discussions at the federal level is how effective activists have been in getting their positions and their language into acts and laws at the legislative level. I don't know if this new if this new Anti-Semitism and Prevention Act is going to get passed, but it started with one sponsor and it now has 30 co-sponsors, including Raskin, by the way, which is really nice. But there are a lot of Jewish co-sponsors now, as well as non-Jews, who are co-sponsoring the Anti-Semitism and Prevention Act. So, any volunteer readers for paragraphs 1 and 2?
I'll do it.
Emily, thank you. Do paragraph 1. Who wants to read paragraph 2? One last voice.
I will.
Paula. Great. Thank you. My Ben the Ark, folks. Thank you. Go ahead.
Approaches are most effective when they address anti-Semitism as connected to other forms of hatred and extremism, strengthen democratic institutions and civil liberties, build broad coalitions across diverse communities, and invest in education and prevention rather than relying solely on punitive measures.
Paula.
History demonstrates that Jewish communities are safest in robust democracies with strong civil liberties, equal protection under the law, and inclusive pluralistic cultures, and most vulnerable when these democratic foundations are eroded, and that weaponizing anti-Semitism for partisan political purposes not only fails to protect Jewish communities, but actively breeds more anti-Semitism by associating Jewish safety with the suppression of civil liberties and the targeting of dissent.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you both. So, um, I know that these are generalities, and if you are really worried about, issues of Jewish safety and security. Do you know about the Community Safety Campaign? I think you may have had some contact with them in OSE. Ben the Arc did a training with them where they take an approach to security that takes those principles that we just heard, and tries to make them work at the local level. Um, if people are really worried about, what is going to happen in my synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, which right now it's very, it is a legitimate concern. There is a group, and I can give you access to it, but you can Google the Secure Community Network, SCN. And this is actually a group of people, Jews and others, with ties to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They've been doing Jewish security. It sort of uses what Ben the Arc calls the armed guard approach, that that you really need literal security protection. And whether you take that approach or not, one of the things I think of concern is if you wanted, for example, to do trainings, which both of these groups recommend, to make your congregations more secure, to make your congregations more safe, trainings about not so much necessarily what to do if there's a shooter, although that can be included, but trainings to form alliances with neighbors who can help keep watch during services, to form alliances where there are reciprocal caretaking going on. This can be really effective as well. But if you're doing DEI initiatives like listening to this talk, I don't really know if that would count. But you understand what I'm saying. You might not get that security grant that might have been available to you otherwise. So, basically what we need to do is go out and vote in the next election. I don't have a call when I've done something like this talk with Indivisible, I had specific calls for action. I just want us to have discussion, sort of open discussion now. We have about 10 minutes left. Um, Sort of coming back to that issue about, are these discussions, do they feel safe? Are there better ways maybe to present some of these issues and some of these materials? Do um, how do we address the issue of criticism of Israel, and say, can we say that it's okay to criticize Israel? And can we say that it's okay to say that not all Jews are supportive right now of the Jewish state, of what the state is doing? Is that okay to talk about those issues? So I would love this smart group's input on some of those issues. And again, if not tonight, if you feel like sending me an email about suggestions, or for the future, I would be grateful. But anything that comes to your mind right now that you want to say or bring up, or that you feel
The
has been.
argument, which I do not buy, is that if you're not Israeli, you can't criticize the Israelis because we don't know what it's like to walk a mile in their footsteps, which is true. Um, but still,
Mhm.
I, there's free speech in this country, at least so far, until they get rid of it
Yeah.
for everybody.
Gerald, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, couldn't the call to action be to help get that the last thing you mentioned through, calling all the senators or wherever who to call to get
It,
that through?
it absolutely could. We don't know yet where its stance is going to be. It
Oh,
probably will be a call to action.
okay.
Because it is a sort of whole government process that involves numerous departments. It is in those departments for vetting. The specific recommendations are in those departments for vetting right now. And when it comes to committee and it's been vetted and approved by those departments, that absolutely will be the call to action. Thanks, Gerald. I should have said that. Thank
Okay.
you.
And I think this was a wonderful presentation. I definitely got a different sense of things and learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. But critiques are also welcome because, as I say, you've been a bit of an experiment. You are the first Jewish congregation that I've spoken to with this talk. So, yes, Brian.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes. Yes. I just have a general comment.
please.
From my reading of people I know in Israel, the stance of Netanyahu is not as popular in the general population of Israel, and perhaps more than 50% are very much opposed to him. And his government might fall as soon as this quiets down a bit. The fact is
Mm.
that there's quite a bit of criticism of Netanyahu within the state of Israel itself. So certainly, we in America have a right to express our opinion on whether we support what's going on with the collaboration of Netanyahu with Trump. I certainly don't, and I lived in Israel for a year, so I have my rather strong opinions on the subject, and they're not supportive. That's my
Thank
two
you.
cents.
That's really interesting because I have read different statistics, but I guess it was a while ago that I read them. It was closer to the Hamas attack, the massacre, which of
Yeah,
course
yeah,
was unspeakable. I mean,
right.
beyond horrible. And at that, it was, I think, probably about 6 months, and I read that 70% of Israelis
Can I
supported
respond to one of the questions
what
before?
Netanyahu.
I don't know, it's sort of moving.
Tom, what, say that again?
You asked the question a while back, who benefits from this?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And I don't know what prescription this leads to, but first of all, it seems to be Netanyahu, right? Okay. In other words, it's a way of rallying the Jewish community in the United States in support of Israel.
Hmm.
Not just in support of Israel, but in support of his policies in
Right.
Israel. Secondly, it definitely helps the Trump administration because it divides the Jewish community, which tends to vote Democratic, and the more division of the Jewish community, the better for the Trump administration.
True.
Um, and thirdly, and also it helps support his attack on academic and cultural institutions. It's a way of destroying the universities, weakening the universities.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I think it helps the evangelical community, which is very pro-Israel. Well, in its after its fashion, certainly anti-Islamic.
Yeah.
And this also helps to weaken the support for Palestinian rights expressed in the United States. So it's extraordinarily pernicious because it is so divisive. Um,
Agreed.
and I think there are a lot of people groups that benefit from this policy, which is why I think it has so much support from the administration.
What I've been struggling with is how APAC and the ADL benefit from this because it's hard for me to understand how they can say they have Jewish values and yet do what they've been doing in supporting these, right-wing Republicans. And but I think two things about that. I do think, I mean, this is a kind of progressive group of people tonight. I do think there is a deep reservoir of fear in parts of the Jewish community of fear. And APAC and the ADL have been at least in the past seen as advocates for, strong advocates for those communities. Look at the donations that they get from the mainstream Jewish community. I also think groups like Power, they APAC is one of the most prolific donors of PACs to people in Congress, to elected people. They have enormous influence over the course of politics on this issue, and it makes it's you can't say those groups. I was talking to someone else about this talk earlier, and talking about what smokescreen, how we're talking about smokescreen anti-Semitism, and I was struggling with the fact that AIPAC and the ADL are, you can't exactly say they're using smokescreen anti-Semitism, although that's the consequence of it, because they are Jewish groups that are at least ostensibly working on behalf of Jewish safety. It's pretty complicated. So the issue of how to oppose those groups, and Ben the Ark is now doing it openly. They're just saying it would be nice if we could all agree, and we just don't agree on this anymore, and we are going to fight you. And other groups are starting to do that too. But it really is, that split is painful to many people. Um,
But
so, you know,
I also think as an historian that the Jewish community is haunted by the Holocaust.
of
Um,
course,
and the fact that at that time the Jewish community was not very well organized in terms of putting pressure on Congress
right.
to act. And I think that sort of never again kind of mentality is
Yes,
operating a lot behind this, at
yes.
least among some people.
I
Uh,
know, I agree. That's what I meant when I said the fear, the just
yeah,
Jewish fear. And it's, the fear is it's understandable. And you're right. A lot
it
of it,
is.
I didn't say anything about the Holocaust except the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is, behind a lot of this. But I think you're absolutely right. If you remember the Holocaust and you remember what happened, but then we should also be remembering what happened the last time people made lists of Jews.
Well, that's yes, exactly. I think, but the um the fact that there is, as you started out, with increasing instances of anti-Semitism, even if some of them have been exaggerated, also gives a foundation for all of this, and it triggers all the Holocaust. Well, if we
Yeah,
don't,
absolutely.
and if you don't start it, if you don't stop it at the beginning, you're going to
Yeah.
wind up with annihilation in the end. Israel's one defeat away from annihilation. It's
Yeah, and
that
that
kind
is
of mentality.
that's this deep feeling of
Yeah.
protectiveness.
So
Well,
it's very
yeah.
pernicious.
Yeah. Well, it's 8:30. It's after 8:30, so we promised to be done in an hour. Thank you all for being such attentive and thoughtful listeners and conversants.